Hello and welcome to the channel Echoes Shadows. In the darkness of lonely roads, truck drivers have experienced terrifying events that defy logic. Real stories of supernatural encounters where the boundary between the world of the living and the unknown becomes frighteningly thin. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming stories. Thank you very much. Story 1. The Dark Hitchhiker.
My name is Roger, and I've been a truck driver for over 15 years. I live in a small town called Springfield, Illinois. I've always loved the open road, the freedom of being far from the city, driving for hours without interruption, feeling that peace you only get when you're alone with your thoughts. I transport goods all over the country, mostly long hauls, many of them through the night. I've had my fair share of odd experiences, but nothing comes close to what happened on that night while driving through Interstate 80, coming back from a delivery in Ohio. It was a Tuesday night, around 2 a.m. The highway was completely empty, which wasn't unusual, and I was at that point where you start feeling tired but not quite enough to stop. I just wanted to make it home, take a shower, and rest. My wife, Lisa, always tells me not to drive so late, but you know how it is. We've got deadlines, and I hate leaving things unfinished. That's when I saw someone up ahead, standing on the side of the road. A figure, slim, with his arms stretched out, hitchhiking. It caught me off guard because, in that stretch of road, there's nothing around, just woods on both sides. But my first thought was that maybe his car broke down, or he got stranded somehow. So I decided to pull over. The guy looked young, probably around 25. He was wearing a dark jacket and his face looked tired, almost drained, but nothing too strange. He climbed into the passenger seat. Right away, it felt off. I tried making conversation, asking where he was headed. He said he needed a ride to Chicago and didn't say much more. I asked where he was coming from, what he did for work, but he only gave short, vague answers. What started to really bother me was how he just stared ahead, completely emotionless. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just tired. We drove in silence for about 15 more minutes before something strange happened. Out of nowhere, this horrible stench filled the cab. It smelled like something had died nearby, rotten and thick. I felt embarrassed and made a comment. "Man, what's that smell?" But he didn't move, didn't even blink. He kept staring straight ahead like I hadn't said a word. Then for just a moment, the headlights flickered. The whole road went dark for a second before the lights came back on. And that's when I noticed he wasn't in the seat anymore. I swear my heart nearly stopped. I knew he was just sitting there, right next to me. I turned my head, looked around, but the seat was empty. My first thought was that maybe I was hallucinating, that the fatigue was catching up with me. But I had seen him, I had talked to him. I pulled over to the shoulder and stepped out, circling the truck, checking the inside again, but nothing. The night was eerily quiet, the road completely deserted. I started to think maybe I imagined it all, but no, he was real. He climbed into my truck. When I got back into the cab, the smell was even stronger, like it was suffocating me. I tried to ignore it and grab my phone to text Lisa, just to calm myself down. But then, as I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw him. He was in the back seat, staring at me with those empty eyes. I froze. I couldn't move. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there. But his presence was overwhelming, like he was draining the air from the cab. The tension in the air was unbearable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I knew I needed to get out of there, to just drive, but my hands wouldn't move. And then, he slowly started reaching out his hand toward me. I've never felt fear like that in my life. I couldn't even scream. Suddenly, the lights on the dashboard started flickering like crazy, and the truck stalled. The lights went out, the radio hissed and died. All I could hear was my own shallow breathing and that eerie, static-like silence. I don't know how I managed to pull myself together, but somehow, I restarted the truck and floored it, speeding down the highway like my life depended on it. The entire time I could feel him, like he was right next to me, even though I didn't dare look. The smell, the silence, that oppressive presence, it was unbearable. I was shaking all over. Every mile felt like an eternity. Finally, I saw a rest stop up ahead and slammed on the brakes. I jumped out of the truck, nearly stumbling over myself trying to catch my breath. I looked back into the cab, terrified he'd still be there, but the seat was empty. He was gone, and just like that, the smell disappeared. It took me a long time to calm down enough to get back in the truck and continue driving. I didn't sleep much for the next few nights, and to this day, every time I drive down that part of Interstate 80, I feel a chill run down my spine. I haven't picked up a hitchhiker since. Never again. After that night, whenever I see someone standing on the side of the road, I think about that blank stare and the feeling of dread that filled the cab. I don't know what that was, but I know for sure it wasn't human. And maybe he's still out there, waiting for his next ride.
Story 2. Trapped in the bathroom.
It was one of those long nights on the road, a cold midnight somewhere between Nashville and Atlanta. The silence of the highway always calmed me down, but that night, something felt different. I was coming back from a delivery in Tennessee, and it was around 2 in the morning. Sleep was creeping in, my eyelids felt heavy, and I knew I needed to take a quick break. That's when I saw the faint glow of a gas station up ahead. It looked like one of those forgotten places, isolated, with only one attendant on duty. It seemed like the perfect spot for a quick stop, some coffee and a bathroom break. I had no idea what awaited me. I parked my truck and stepped out, feeling the cool night air hit my face. The gas station attendant was sitting on a chair near the convenience store, his cap pulled low over his face. He didn't even stir when I walked by, as if he was completely detached from the world. I headed straight for the restroom, which was located on the far side of the station, a bit removed from the main area. The door was old, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, a strong, musty smell hit me immediately. Worn-out tiles, flickering lights. Something about that place didn't feel right, but the urgency of my need made me ignore the unease. I picked the last stall, the only one where the door still latched properly. The bathroom was empty, and the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. I tried to hurry, but as I sat there, something strange began to happen. First, I heard a noise, like a soft scratching sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe the sound of an old door somewhere creaking, but the sound didn't stop. It was constant, getting louder and clearer. It sounded like something was dragging along the wall of the stall next to me. I tried to brush it off, finishing as quickly as I could, but the sound persisted. My heart began to race. It's just my imagination playing tricks, I thought. But as I stood up, ready to leave, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the flickering light, I saw a shadow dart from one stall to the other, too fast to be a reflection or anything normal. My whole body went cold. Did someone else come in? I wondered, but I would have heard the door open. Holding my breath, I peeked through the crack of the stall door, but saw no one. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, and pushed the door to step out. That's when the real nightmare began. When I tried to open the stall door, it wouldn't budge. I locked and unlocked it again, but nothing. It was as if something was holding it shut from the outside. I started pulling harder, feeling my heart pound faster. I was locked in. I started banging on the door, but it barely moved. Then I heard the sound again, but this time, it wasn't the soft scratching. It was footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps coming toward me. Panic surged through me. "Is someone in here?" I shouted, but there was no answer. I tried to open the door again, pounding on it with my fists, but it was no use. Then suddenly the air in the bathroom grew colder, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. A shadow began to move under the door, but it wasn't a normal shadow. It was dense, almost alive, and it began creeping up through the gap, as if it were crawling toward me. My heart was racing, and my breathing became ragged. That thing moved slowly, savoring my fear. It was as if time had frozen. When the shadow finally reached the door handle, the stall door creaked open by itself. I burst out, not even daring to look back, stumbling over my feet as I ran toward the exit. But when I reached the bathroom door, it too was locked. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't give. I was trapped again, this time in the entire bathroom. That's when I saw it. The light flickered, and in the mirror above the sinks, a figure began to materialize. At first it was just a blur, but then the features of a face started to emerge. Long, dark hair covered part of the face, and hollow, empty eyes stared back at me. It was a woman, but not just any woman. Her face was distorted, her skin pale, almost translucent. She moved inside the mirror, and I felt frozen, paralyzed under her gaze. I felt a presence behind me, but before I could react, I was violently shoved to the ground. I fell hard on my back. The wind knocked out of me. I tried to get up, but my body felt heavy, as if something was pinning me down. I looked up, and she was no longer in the mirror. She was standing there, in the bathroom, right in front of me, watching me with those empty, haunting eyes. I scrambled backward, trying to get away, but she reached me. I felt her icy hands grab my arm, pulling me back to the center of the bathroom. She didn't say a word, but her presence was overwhelming, suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman started moving closer, her face inches from mine. Her eyes, hollow and dark, seemed to suck all the light out of the room. In a desperate attempt, I kicked out at her, but I felt nothing. In that same moment, the bathroom door flew open with a loud crash. I didn't think twice. I ran, my heart pounding in my throat. I rushed past the attendant, who was still sitting there, motionless, as if nothing had happened. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and floored it like never before. As I sped away from the station, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was standing there at the entrance of the bathroom, just watching me drive away. Since that night, I swore to myself I'd never stop at isolated gas stations in the middle of the night again. Because that night, I didn't just escape from a bathroom, I escaped from something far worse, something that might still be out there, waiting. I kicked out at her, but I felt nothing. In that same moment, the bathroom door flew open with a loud crash. I didn't think twice. I ran, my heart pounding in my throat. I rushed past the attendant, who was still sitting there, motionless, as if nothing had happened. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and floored it like never before. As I sped away from the station, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was standing there at the entrance of the bathroom, just watching me drive away. Since that night, I swore to myself I'd never stop at isolated gas stations in the middle of the night again. Because that night, I didn't just escape from a bathroom, I escaped from something far worse, something that might still be out there, waiting.
Story 3. Echoes on the Dark Road.
My name is Tony Smith, and I've been a truck driver for over 15 years. My life is the road, hauling freight across the country, especially here in Texas, where I live, in the city of San Antonio. It's hard work, but I take pride in it. I've seen nearly every corner of this country, but there's one thing most people don't know. Some roads, when the sun goes down, are different. The asphalt feels like it has its own history, stories you don't hear often, but ones that those of us who drive at night, like me, come to know in the worst possible way. Today, I'm going to tell you about the most terrifying of them all. It was a Friday like any other. I had to leave home around 4 p.m., right after lunch, to deliver a load of appliances to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Sarah, my wife, always gave me a tight hug and told me to be careful. But that night, I felt something different in her embrace, a worry that seemed bigger than usual. "Be careful on the road, Tony. The weather's going to get bad. Stay alert," she whispered. I smiled, kissed her, and went on my way, just like always. I took the I-10, a highway I knew like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. The forecast called for rain, and the sky began to darken earlier than usual. Everything seemed normal until about 8 p.m., when I was well into my trip. The weather had gotten heavy, and the radio in my truck started to crackle. I turned it off. Silence and the road had always been my companions. But that night, the silence felt different. As soon as I switched off the radio, I started to hear a faint noise, like static. At first, I thought it was the wind sneaking in through a crack or maybe the engine making noise. But the sound became clearer, more distinct. It was voices. Small, confusing whispers, like several people talking at once. I checked the rearview mirror but saw nothing. I figured it was just exhaustion setting in. I kept driving, but the voices got louder. They were coming from all directions, like they were in the back seat of the cab. A cold chill ran down my spine, even though the windows were shut tight. My hand gripped the steering wheel harder, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my forehead, despite the cool night air. I wasn't sure what was happening. Suddenly, something crossed the road right in front of me. It was quick, but I caught a glimpse of a man's figure. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded, but I managed to keep it under control. I checked the mirrors again, but there was no one there. I got out of the cab, grabbed my flashlight, and looked around to see if I had hit something. The road was completely empty, not a soul in sight. Only the wind howled through the darkness. That's when I felt it. A deep, cold shiver. The air around me seemed thicker, almost as if something invisible was surrounding me. The voices returned, now louder and closer, and the worst part, they were saying my name. "Tony," they whispered. My eyes darted through the darkness, searching for something, anything that would explain what was happening. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Without thinking, I rushed back to the cab, locking the door behind me. I floored the gas pedal, and the road stretched out in front of me, feeling longer than ever. The night's darkness was thick, and the headlights didn't seem to reach more than a few feet ahead. Fear crept into me, and the voices wouldn't stop. They grew stronger, like an echo, repeating my name over and over. I started to think I was losing my mind. Then I saw it in the rearview mirror. In the back seat, there was someone, a figure, a woman with long, tangled hair and pale, almost translucent skin. She was there, sitting still, staring at me. I screamed, glanced again, and she was gone. I began to pray, whatever prayer came to mind, but the feeling that I wasn't alone in the truck wouldn't leave. The road ahead became even darker. It was as if the sky had completely closed in. No stars, no moonlight. That's when something happened, something I can't explain. A loud bang, like a heavy thud, shook the truck. I looked around, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Outside, along the side of the road, figures began to appear. People, or at least they looked like people. Men and women, dressed in old, dirty, torn clothes. Some of their faces were disfigured, others were covered in blood. All of them were walking slowly along the edge of the road, watching me, never breaking eye contact. The voices grew louder again, now a chorus, as if they were singing, but it wasn't a song. It was a sharp, disturbing sound that gnawed at my mind. I tried to push the truck faster, but the engine started to sputter. It coughed like it was about to give out any second. I glanced at the speedometer, which was rapidly dropping, and that's when I heard it. A scream. A woman's scream, desperate, coming from inside the truck. I looked to the passenger seat, and there she was again, the woman. Her eyes were hollow, dark, lifeless. She opened her mouth, and the sound that came out wasn't human. My ears ached, and everything around me started to spin. The lights on the dashboard flickered. The truck, which had always been my fortress, now felt like a prison. I was trapped with them, with her. I closed my eyes, screamed, and in the midst of the chaos, the engine roared back to life like never before. I pressed the pedal to the floor, trying to outrun whatever was behind me. The remaining miles to the nearest gas station felt like the longest of my life. When I finally got there, I practically jumped out of the cab and ran into the station's office, out of breath, unable to explain what had just happened. The attendant gave me a strange look, asked if I was all right, and all I could say was, "The road was strange tonight." He smiled, half doubtful, and said, "Oh, you passed through the Pine Hollow stretch, didn't you? That kind of stuff happens there more than you'd think." Since that night, I never take that road after dark. And the voices, well, I still hear them sometimes. Even at home in the silence, they come back.